Hello and welcome to our Resilient by Design Roundtable. Welcome at CERRE. We were just counting down because we have an online audience joining us. This is a live-streamed event, so it's not Chatham House rules. And I would like to invite our chairman and CERRE's founder to provide introductory remarks.
Thank you, Annika, and welcome everybody. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to say a few words to open this roundtable. First of all, it's clear that our event couldn't be timelier, and when we planned it, we certainly didn't know that the Strait of Hormuz would be paralyzed by the Middle East conflict, and that the oil and gas markets would be on a roller coaster ride, hour by hour. But what we know for sure, as the French president would say, was that European energy systems were going through a particularly challenging time. Because to say the least, when you look at the geopolitical environment, which is surrounding the operations of the energy systems, you see that it's much more complex and much more uncertain than it was even a few months ago. I can mention the war in Ukraine. I can mention the persistent tensions in global supply chains, growing cyber threats, and the exposure of energy infrastructure to terrorism, and also increasingly to extreme weather events. And all these developments have highlighted the need for a stronger focus on resilience in policy and also in regulation. And therefore, ensuring that the energy system remains secure, remains robust in the face of shocks, that has become a central policy challenge. And the question was, how could Europe address such a challenge while remaining committed to the energy transition and to the acceleration of electrification? And answering that question has been very high in the position of CERRE's agenda in 2025, in particular within the framework of our successful CERRE Resilience Forum. And this has led to the publication of 5 papers on these topics. And today's session will provide an opportunity to present, to discuss 3 of them, which have not yet been discussed yet. The first one is cyber resilience as a pillar of European energy security by Alessandro Lazzari, who's around here somewhere. Hi. Second one on supply chain resilience in the electricity sector. I'm alone here. By Giancarlo Spagnolo, who's joining us online. And the third one by Kong Chiang on resilience to price shocks in coupled gas electricity markets. We are also going this afternoon to listen to a presentation of a very forward-looking paper by our academic director, Catherine Banet, who's sitting on my right, and CERRE research fellow Paul Timmers on Catherine's right. And this paper draws, if you want, it's a paper which draws on the conclusions of all 5 papers of the Resilience Forum, and it puts them in a broader perspective, broader context of both energy and also digital regulation, because as you know, CERRE is about energy, but CERRE is about mobility and also about digital. And in fact, this afternoon, we're running in parallel this event and 20 meters on the other side of the corridor, a digital regulatory lab. So, as you know, or as you will see, CERRE's research contribution on resilience in the energy sectors, in the energy systems, is taking very different angles, and it's drawing on various academic disciplines. And I'd like to commend our academic team for their extremely valuable and again timely work. I also would like to thank warmly the corporations and regulatory agencies which are members of CERRE and which, without challenging our academic independence, have sponsored our Resilience Forum. Let me quote them: Terna, PPC, GRDF, E.ON and Bayernwerk, and the Northern Irish Utility Regulator. Our studies have benefited greatly from the comments and the criticism sometimes of all our sponsors, but clearly their dedication and their commitment to this comprehensive research effort is very much appreciated. I'm also glad to welcome Monica Zigri and Christine Banken and several other representatives from the European Commission. We much appreciate your presence, your interest, and we're really happy about our collaboration, which is taking place ahead of the upcoming revision of the EU Security of Supply Framework. And finally, on a personal note, I would like to ask you to excuse me, since I will have to leave you before the end of this interesting meeting, given previous and long-standing commitments. So I wish you all, including the many of you watching us online, to enjoy what I'm confident will be very illuminating presentations, and I really hope that you'll be able and you'll have the opportunity to actively participate in the discussion. And now I give the floor to Annika, our Director Energy.
Yes, thank you very much, Bruno. I'm very excited that we are today here and the mic. I'm so sorry. So thank you very much, Bruno, and thank you for the hint. So Monica, I'm turning to you. We wanted to have a conversation with you ahead of our discussion because, of course, resilience is not a new topic. And you have actually worked, I think, you have about 15 years of experience in the EU institutions, and you've come across quite a few of those topics. I think you've worked on LNG, you've worked on storage, you've worked on gas purchasing, and a number of those issues that we might discuss today. So I'm really glad you're here. You're the head of the Energy Security and Safety Unit at DG ENER. And so I wanted to ask you, since resilience is not a new topic, we've seen a energy price crisis in 22, 23, Kong would correct me now, 21, 23. We've seen extreme weather events across Europe. We've seen physical threats to infrastructure. So where do we stand in Europe today? And what is the regulatory framework, or what's your thinking about energy security at this point?
Well, this was a relatively short question, but the answer can take a few hours. But I think you will have enough time to go or dive more into the details. Well, resilience as a concept probably is not very new. However, the term itself has become more popular in these last few years, especially following the 22, 23, 24 energy crisis. Of course, that was accompanied by a price crisis, but prices, we know, it just reflects the situation, the tightness of the market. What we have seen, especially since 2022, indeed the acceleration of the different risks materializing that are threatening the energy system, not only its infrastructure, but also all the demand and supply patterns, all the way it is built. And with the 22 crisis, we have also accelerated the process of decarbonization. Until then, it was a long-term vision. It was for 2050, but during these last few years, the whole process has been accelerating. And actually, it was one of the partially it was one of the answers to the energy crisis that erupted in 22. So when it comes to the resilience aspects, and I think practically all the threats have been more or less mentioned. One of the more strong external impacts or threats is the geopolitical context, which has become indeed uncertain, and this uncertainty requires us to be prepared for very extreme situations, even situations that we do not expect may happen. Extreme situations can also come from the impact of climate change. We have seen different climate events that have been more and more extreme and actually more frequent, and those are all elements for which the current energy security framework has not been really prepared for. And when I speak about energy security, we have to also think about all the other types of legislation that lay the foundation to provide a basic security of supply level. And I think also the types of works and studies you have been doing, they also touch upon it. We have an infrastructure which is the fundament of the energy markets. It does provide a basic level of energy security. The internal market regulation also provides for a basic level of energy security. And when we are talking about the revision of our energy security framework, we are focusing mostly on the extreme situations which we have seen becoming more frequent, and for which all the existing legislation is indeed not yet there.
And can you give us an indication of where your thinking is going given the current events? And I think the resilience and security is top of mind, and also the energy price top of mind of European decision makers. Many meetings happening at the moment as we speak. So are you changing course? Are there things that need to be picked up for the upcoming revision of the security of supply framework?
Well, there are existing horizontal legislation when it comes to protecting critical entities or critical infrastructure. Energy is partly covered. There are also cybersecurity rules that have been adopted and are under implementation. Again, we have to see whether there is anything that we can complement from an energy perspective. When we're looking at infrastructure and infrastructure protection, again, there are elements which need to be strengthened. During the current commission, one of the dimensions that has received a lot of focus is security. And so as we go through the revision of our energy security framework, we are also strengthening this security dimension in it. So be it protecting critical energy infrastructure on the one side, be it cyber, hybrid, or climate threats, reinforcing the assessment of risks that come from these areas and requiring an adaptation or measures that can address these risks so that the energy supply can be maintained for longer. When it comes to geopolitical risks and the overall decarbonization and dependence on certain suppliers or supply routes, is something that we are also looking at. We have not really had that before. We only have a requirement for the infrastructure to allow for diversification. However, we have not really looked at how that can be implemented more strictly. And what we see, for example, now happening in the Middle East, that is also one element of strengthened risk assessments that we have to take into consideration. identifying the geopolitical risks and looking at the risks that come from certain suppliers, supplying countries, or actually geographical location and the choke points that we can that exist that can impact how energy is actually delivered to the EU for as long that it has to be imported. So because also one of the objectives of decarbonization and electrification is that we rely more and more on domestically produced energy sources, be it in particular renewable energy sources on the continent.
And I think we heard the President also saying it's part of the insurance policy of Europe is that homegrown energy. Can you tell us a little bit more about also the other pieces of legislation? There's so many initiatives coming out at the moment, and it feels like they all have now resilience and security written on them. It also feels like the Industrial Accelerator Act was rethought a little bit in those terms. I don't know if you agree with me. Discussions on the market design, of course, all linked to the affordability question and the price developments. Do you feel confirmed in your work over the years that this is now taking center stage, and do you think there's enough being done?
Indeed, there are many different initiatives coming out or proposed by the Commission on different aspects that are related to actual resilient societies across Europe. So it does not only limit to energy. It's not limited only to energy, especially because, as you also said in the introductory remarks, if there is a crisis, if there is a question of preparedness, we cannot just stay in silos and focus on one single sector. Whatever happens in energy, it will have a wider impact on the wider economy and society. I think I don't have to mention examples that have been happening during the last years. And equally, when it comes to, for example, cyber or physical attacks, it can impact different areas of the economy, but also energy. So there are simply more interlinkages, and this can also be seen by the initiatives that the Commission is proposing these days that have a whole society, whole economy approach. So we have an EU preparedness strategy that tries to reinforce the level of preparedness in different areas and different sectors so that when a crisis comes, the impact can be mitigated. We have also an internal security strategy that is focusing on more internal elements. We have an economic security strategy, which is very relevant for energy, because this is where we see the linkages between European industry supporting the energy transition, the presence of European companies as part of different supply chains that may be critical for the functioning and for the security of the EU. And when it comes to energy, one of the examples that is always brought up is the question of, for example, the solar supply chain or the wind supply chain, which is there to improve the energy security of the continent by supporting domestically produced energy. But at the same time, in order to build these supply chains, you will have the different supply chain elements coming from different countries. And we have to make sure that if there is an EU industry, then that the EU industry actually can take part in these supply chains. And I think you just mentioned the Industrial Accelerator Act that was adopted today, that also is trying to look at protecting these supply chains, especially those that are required or needed for the decarbonization, then energy transition, looking at clean tech, and trying to mitigate the risks that come with more global supply chains, and also at the same time support European industry to be present in those and remain active.
You preempted my next question, which would have been supply chains and critical components. Yeah. And I guess it's difficult to draw a line between, how far you want to go between protecting locally produced content and also ensuring that there is, we have access to critical technologies. Are there perhaps any questions from the room, since we still have a few minutes? Yes. Talking critical components. Yes.
Yeah. No. Benedikt Herge, Siemens Energy. You mentioned that the energy security framework, that you will review this also with regard to making sure that it's better equipped against physical or hybrid attacks. Can you give a bit more details in which direction you're thinking there? Is this just on the prevention part, or is it also on the bringing power back part? So being up and running again after an attack. So can you elaborate a bit what the Commission is thinking there?
There are two aspects here, indeed. So one of them is better preparedness through better risk assessment, identifying the risks, accepting or acknowledging that there is an increased number of attacks or by either man-made on purpose or climate impacts on infrastructure and entities. So this is one on preparedness. And on the other side, because resilience is not only about better preparedness, but also a very quick recovery of whatever has been damaged. And as part of that, we are also considering focusing on repair and stockpiling capabilities. And one of the, because this is not something that we have had so far in our framework, we would also like to use that as part of potential solidarity measures when it comes to supporting across borders the recovery. When it comes to stockpiling, obviously the first step would be to identify what are the critical parts that may be useful for the energy system, be it gas or electricity, and have an identification on what is needed at the EU level to be kept, and see whether there could be or whether it makes sense having a mechanism that allows for sharing these spare parts, so at the same time being prepared, allowing for quick recovery, but also at a minimum cost. Of course, there are limitations as there are different technologies, and not all spare parts would be working across all technologies, but identifying which of these are and where cooperation could be promoted is an important step. It may also trigger a bit of standardization process, but that is not something that we want to, in fact, write into legislation. We would like to see actual stakeholders and operators to identify where they think such standardization may make sense in the future.
Very interesting. Almost calls for a response from industry if they feel up to it for the challenge.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Massimo Micinelli and Lilian Fleisch from the Hilliard team, energy team. Very interesting presentation. I'd like to ask you a question a little bit beyond the scope of energy. As we have seen Industrial Accelerator Act and trade policy, taking action in such a fundamental point, how does calibrate or recalibrate a bit your conception about energy security? Is that have an impact how DG Energy is cooperating with DG Trade and DG Grow on this very important aspect? Thank you.
Well, this is, so as I said, we don't function in silos anymore. It doesn't make sense. And indeed, when it comes to especially the Accelerator Act, but also the economic security strategy or doctrine, within that we do cooperate with colleagues, because any one component, any one supply chain has impacts or has different dimensions that need to be considered. For example, if I go back to the solar supply chain, from a decarbonization and energy policy point of view, it is important that those supply chains are not disrupted. However, from an economic security perspective, it is important that in those supply chains we make sure that EU participation is there, or at least the risks that come or stem from the existence of global supply chains are mitigated in a way. So we always have to find a balance between these policy areas, and of course that requires quite an intense discussion, and then of course it will be the political masters who will decide on where the different weights end up.
Okay, we would have time for a last question, if there's any in the room. Yes, Alessandro, please come in.
From the University of Salento. I've been for 9 years in the European Commission, and I was wondering whether you see a future in which the Critical Entity Resilience Directive and the NIS2 maybe merge into one, instead of having CERRE 2 and NIS3. Would you see that could be an option? Because this is still creating, these two flip coin of physical versus cyber, where unfortunately, and this is part of the question, from the field, I can ensure that cyber is taken much more seriously than physical security. And with the latest development, we can no longer afford to have weak physical security in our critical infrastructure. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, now whether the CERRE directive and the NIS2 would merge, I don't know. It's really not my place. However, when it comes to energy security policy, we do consider them practically merged as a risk and as a problem that is threatening energy infrastructure, energy entities, and the energy system. So under energy policy, if you want to understand it that way, we are merging them, because for us, whether it's cyber, hybrid, physical, climate, it doesn't really matter. The piece of infrastructure which is critical for energy supply is something that is the driving aspect, and so within or under energy security we do merge the two, and I would leave the other decisions to colleagues in the other policy areas. Yeah.
Monica, we will come back to that. I guess you will have to leave, but we will discuss Alessandro's paper where he's discussing the framework as it is for cyber at the moment in a second. But I would like to thank you very much for coming here, for allowing us to ask you a few questions about the important work that you're doing. We will now turn to Paul and Catherine. Catherine Barnet and Paul Timmers have taken it on them to read all the different papers that were produced under this resilience paper into a resilience forum, and to distill key learnings, distill some of the recommendations that are cross-cutting, and to perhaps also already provide an outlook. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you two.
Thank you very much, Annika, and thank you, Monica, for your insightful comments and information about the processes ahead. Very delighted to be here today to come at the end of this cycle through the Resilience Forum, and I would like to start by thanking very much the CERRE team at EMS for the very hard work put into that, as well all colleagues that authored papers. It was really a collective reflection effort, and we could not do that without a strong team. And finally, Paul, for co-authoring this perspective paper. And we, as Bruno mentioned, had two main objectives with this paper. That was first to present and put into context the main finding of the papers, and second as well, to look forward and to suggest some policy alignment to make Europe's regulatory approach fit for these challenges. And when we talk about resilience, there are as well two dimensions to it. There is an internal one and an external one. Internal, that means that we also have a resilient European law and policy framework in itself that could be resilient to changes and able as well to address them without forcing reform. And the second one is external, and look at the manner the framework is able to address the different sources of disruption, and we're very much here into resilience building. How can we foster resilience building through regulation? So we have identified in this paper some element of context, and notably taking a step back and thinking, what is resilience? Monica mentioned that this is something that has been existing for many years. Indeed, it has been a concept elaborated in different disciplines, but sometimes it is used as a buzzword, notably in policy documents at European national level, without really understanding the content of it and what does it require, and notably having a comprehensive and systemic approach to it. So let's just recall what resilience is, and to put it shortly, that's the ability of a natural system to resist and undergo changes without losing its core structure and function. So really the process is to be able to deal with a change, to continue developing, and this without losing the core function. Otherwise, we're moving into a new state of play. And European legislation starts referring to resilience and the need to be more resilient, and we now have a definition in the EU Critical Entities Resilience Directive, providing for legal definition for it. But when we look at the other legislation, we have different understanding and terms for referring to different parts of resilience: reliability, adequacy of supply, security of supply, restoration, all this supported by requirements and metrics. These concepts and metrics, they all capture an aspect of resilience, but what we need is to align this understanding and that they can work all together. Same for cyber resilience. So a major challenge for fostering resilience is the European alignment throughout these different requirements and metrics.
Perhaps I add a word here. It's actually so in the diagram that you see, it kind of tries to capture the picture of what's happening in this field and also what might happen in the field. So some perspectives for the future too. And it's actually quite interesting. If you read these 5 papers, you see many cross connections and also different perspectives. So although we can have a legal definition of resilience, in all 5 papers you find different and valid perspectives on what resilience is about. So that alone already, and I must say they are quite readable, the papers, is worthwhile to go through all of them.
And they all intend to address a list of drivers, concerns, considerations. And we list here 6 main policy objectives that should be captured by resilience building through European legislation. We start by, and that's the very first paper in the forum, mitigation and adaptation to climate change. We have also addressed energy security, including a comprehensive security of supply framework and affordability concerns in the period of high price spikes.
So there are a number of other drivers that increasingly play a role. If you look up the Industrial Accelerator Act, there's a lot there actually about Europe's competitiveness. It's an industrial policy approach that you see there. So industrial competitiveness has come much to the foreground, and you see, in fact, also for this commission, there's competitiveness and security are the 2 major lines of policy. That intersects a lot with the concerns that we have about the geopolitical dimension, who's providing the equipment, do we have control on the critical equipment, and what is happening in these systems that are increasingly also both exposed to physical and to cyber attacks and risks. So cybersecurity is a major theme, has already been mentioned several times also by Monica, not only purely cyber, but also hybrid attacks. And then the somewhat broader picture being strategic autonomy. So if you would see it as circles, you might say strategic autonomy is enveloping all of this, economic security is within that, and resilience is again within that. That topic of strategic autonomy, this is actually what you see happening right now in the policy papers that are coming out, because you're saying there are many coming out. Now you see really the word sovereignty and strategic autonomy actually appearing. Not before that time. Lots of people are saying that Europe was on the track of strategic autonomy. Not really until, let's say, about a year ago. But now it's really starting to happen, mainly also, or certainly importantly, about as a consequence of geopolitical developments.
And geopolitical tensions, we are witnessing that more and more. They're impacting the global and European economies deeply. They delay investment decisions, they disrupt and reconfigure supply chains, they increase commodity prices and energy costs, they alter growth, welfare, not talking about disinformation, that's something as well that we should be aware of, and all these may lead to geo-economic fragmentation. And this is something that we see from an internal market point of view, but as well a trade perspective, that we need to strengthen the resilience framework to address this risk of fragmentation. The economic and financial stability in Europe is closely linked to the performance of the internal market. And therefore, fragmentation of the internal energy market poses high risk. It results in costs for governments, for companies, for citizens, instead of creating benefits along the value chains and the society. And several papers in the forum conclude that realizing a true single market, to take the wording of the International Monetary Fund, and deepening the internal energy market integration, as well as market coupling, by notably investing in cross-border infrastructure, is an imperative. At the border to the EU, when we look a bit around the internal market and its extension, strategic partnership should be continued and pursued and strengthened. This starts with the extension of the internal market through, for example, the European Economic Area Agreement or the Energy Community Treaty. And this puts international partnership under France and for assessment, like-minded, value-based realism. That's something that we have seen very much discussed at the Davos Forum. And it forces the EU as well to quickly rethink its partnership strategy. Monica has been working a lot on joint purchasing initiative, that's part of it, but as well partnerships around Team Europe and Global Gateway.
Now, one item that is we found worthwhile to highlight separately is technology and innovation. If you go through all the 5 papers and look at the field, then there's this major role that is played by new technologies and innovation for resilience in energy systems. Undeniably so, and you can mention many technologies, but striking in itself is already, we have presented here 3 pillars: digital, energy and clean tech and infrastructure, that these also interrelate, that they are very much actually interrelated. So whether you look at it in the papers about security of supply, the architecture, whether you look at it from the perspective of the supply chains, whether you look at it from the perspective of cyber, you see these technologies, or climate, you see these technologies all coming back. At the infrastructure side, the changes in the infrastructure, the cross-border dimension, both having a centralized approach as well as a high degree of distribution, decentralization, with small providers, prosumers coming into the mix, into the infrastructure at scale. So, although small, at scale. One of the areas that is of great concern, I think Alessandro also argues that that's partially kind of like a blind spot almost that we have from a resilience perspective, and energy communities. At the energy and clean tech side, the security of supply, the energy mix, storage, batteries, you already mentioned that, and the policies that we have around that. Often also, by the way, underpinned by, for example, technologies like cloud, marketplaces, etc., to manage this energy mix. And then more generally, the massive introduction of digital technologies in energy systems, which runs from cloud, Internet of Things, to 5G, 6G, satellites, indeed also, and AI is coming up very strongly, as well as cyber and the certification of that. So in all of these technologies, you see it's kind of like the opportunity that we have there. It's the question, how much are we present as Europe in these technologies? In the digital technologies, Europe is buying 80% of all its digital technologies from outside Europe, from foreign providers, so we have a very high degree of dependency with all the risks that are coming with that, and the issue then of trust.
We are already running out of time when we look at all we need to address at the same time on very short notice and across sectors. And in the forum, the different papers identify actions that need indeed to be taken now to bolster, to foster resilience in the energy system and across the cyber as well sector. We have identified some key recommendations in this Action Now call. And first is, it's always a no-brainer, but it's fundamental full transposition and implementation of adopted legislation. It's always nicer to inaugurate a new bridge and not maintain the one we have. So here, full implementation of existing frameworks before adding new layers should be a priority. We also stress the need to provide guidance in this effort to speed up implementation to the member states by elaborating and aligning on, for example, key criteria such as resilience by design, indicators for investments and technological resilience, public procurement, and European content requirements. There will be a lot of work to do in light of the Industrial Acceleration Act, and as well to do that across vectors and across sectors: gas, electricity, heat, cooling, etc. Another point is to clarify objectives and competences for regulatory supervision. We see that very much at the moment, where we need to look at who is competent to do what between regulatory authorities themselves and ministry, but as well at the level of the companies, the operators, and looking at the clear allocation of role that everybody is ready to really fulfill this role when needed. This also requires effective regional coordination. We have fora for coordination, but we can empower them more based on the same allocation of competences. And climate shocks, as stressed by the first paper, do not respect national borders, and by the last paper on energy shock, they do have collateral effect on neighboring member states. Then we need to adapt financing pathways at all relevant levels, meaning providing clarity on what measures require supranational funding, for example, and what can be borne by consumers at the very end through notably network tariffs. And there is still an ongoing reflection and guidelines, notably by the Commission on update of network tariffs. It's important to here continue the effort to protect consumers without distorting market signals. So the best approach to resilience being anticipatory, we also need to reinforce this effort of guidance around anticipatory, notably anticipatory investments. And finally, something that we stress in the security of supply paper is energy market design legislation. That is the foundation of the operation of the energy system in Europe and the basis as well for security of supply and preparedness measures. Here, as we argued in other papers on the electricity market design, we argue through the papers for the careful approach to it, targeted approach to address some remaining or new non-system, non-operational related risk, such as ownership risks, but careful approach to revision. And where do we go from here? Then we have first a question of providing some perspective and alignment.
So what we did is, having read all these papers and summarized that in the paper that has these diagrams, there are these concrete actions that you can pick up from the papers themselves. We have just summarized that, probably not done quite justice, but there are also some perspectives coming out of that. One of those is definitely what we see right now today, and which is also, by the way, discussed in one of the papers this afternoon, is navigating the turbulences. So this is, there are kind of like several keywords that you see coming up increasingly. It's turbulence, it's urgency, it is Europe first perhaps even. It's a completely different kind of way of thinking. So it's not only that we need to navigate these turbulences and understand them better across these various domains. So it's not only energy, but it's also, for example, digital and finance and the sectors that are using energy. It's also about being able to deal with this moment of change, energy at the crossroads.
And that also means that we need to reflect on energy union as a vision as well. We have a revision upcoming as well for this framework. That is the main framework for steering the different objectives and targets around the energy union. We are at a congestion moment for that, and we must respond to many threats at the same time, anticipate, react to them, but we also need a coordinated effort for that. So the governance framework is here a key opportunity, and in the regulation there are definition of some central planning and monitoring requirements, which should not be replaced by simple investment plans, in our view. That's stressed in some of the papers. And the revision is a good opportunity for policy alignment with resilience objective as identified in the different issue papers.
And then you see also a topic there that you may find odd, civil defense preparedness, but we see increasingly that this is coming up from the various lines of thinking. It's also very much in the Preparedness Union, the Ninisto report that pushed for that, something that is a reality today, and where it is not realistic that the cost of this form of preparedness and resilience is only carried by, let's say, only the defense sector or only the civil sector. There has to be this combination of both financially, but also, for example, in terms of exercising, which you do not yet see happening at scale, but we probably should do that. And it's also in terms of the technologies. Many of the technologies that are necessary in this sector and that are necessary for resilience in the civil domain are actually almost the same as in the military domain. So that is both good and bad, and we need to cope with this kind of dual-use approach. Overall, this fits perfectly in the thinking of more strategic autonomy for Europe, which is these days Chefsache. And then finally, European governance. You want to say something about it?
Yeah, I think we covered.
Okay, we did that, yeah. So with that, perhaps we conclude kind of briefly the overview of these papers. I cannot stress enough, it's really worthwhile to go through the papers, actually quite inspiring, and I hope that also in the discussion this afternoon we see some of the cross-connections or the opportunities to learn, so to say, from one perspective to the other perspective.
Thank you so much. That was really on time and on the point, and a tour de force through all the papers, and I think a few heads are fuming right now. We're going to unpack it a little bit, and I invite you also to come into the discussion again. I should have told you that you've certainly noticed also the two have very different backgrounds. Catherine Banet is with an energy law background, and Paul Timmers is actually You spend quite a few years in DG Connect and usually work with our tech practice, and you have a little bit of a different perspective. We wanted to really work on this cross-cutting and cross-sector perspective also on resilience. So let's unpack this. Lots of experts here in the room, but I'm turning to Alessandro Lazzari first, because you've worked on the question of cyber resilience and hybrid threats. And you've shown how Europe has actually worked quite a bit over the past years already on the topic. What are your conclusions?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and for allowing me to join this fantastic network of experts, to allow me to work with Catherine and Paul and all the others. Of course, thanks also for the operators, because they provided very good feedback for, the draft of my paper, and this is also, I bring together their conclusion because they were really on the point. I wish I could say that we have some time to reflect, but we have not. Italians used to say we live in a delicate moment, a moment of perma-crisis in which we don't recover, we just recover from something big and we then enter into something even bigger, like it's happening in the last, like a couple of weeks. So my paper also reflects a little bit this conclusion, the fact that we live in a time of uncertainty, and for sure we have recognized strongly that we have a very good framework. I've worked for the GRC for like 9.5 years during the first European program for critical infrastructure protection. So it was at the really embryonic time where we were working only on the physical dimension. Now we have the CERRE directive, the NIS2 already, we have the Seveso regulation directive that is also part of the deal for the value chain of energy that is also subject to this directive. We have the DORA for other sectors. So we can really say that our framework is mature, but the comprehension of the environment, it is not at all, because we have very good framework, but still at member state level, at certain operator level, they still need to metabolize everything they need to do. So my paper recognized that we have a very good framework. Many countries worldwide that are outside of the EU and apart from the second enlargement agenda are looking into our framework because they consider them very mature. and very well on the point, but still we need, we have, a difficulty that is to interpret all the obligation that we have, in the combined dimension of all these, directive. The one that I mentioned in the paper is the NIS2, of course, the critical entity resilience one, and the SEVESO. And we need to allow time for the industry and operator to implement correctly this legislation. Not all of them have the same strength, the same fundings and forces to withstand this. And we don't have also to forget that beyond just the operator that are the first line, because they are officially designated as operator of critical infrastructure or essential service, there's all the supply chain of this operator that is not only the supply chain the goods that we import from outside of the union, but are all these small, medium enterprise that are working for the operators, and maybe they are also vital for certain operation of these entities. So the report recognized that, and also recognize the fact that the time of uncertainty are given by the fact that we see hybrid threats on the rise. So on top of conventional type of attack, we have hybrid threats. And hybrid threats have really bring two very big difficulties. That is the strong difficulties in detection and deterrence, because they are always playing below the formal, the threshold of formally declared warfare. They are very difficult to detect. And for operator is even more difficult, because this is a part of the deal that should be dealt with by government, by agencies, because they cannot, follow everything is happening in the misinformation or, economic warfare. I'm really concerned of the fact that, we have been very liberal in allowing a lot of non-EU, shareholders participate our European companies, and now we have companies that are heavily participated by foreign countries, and we don't know if the interest of these foreign countries, coincide with our interest. So this is also a topic we need to address, and it's part of the deal. It's part of the hybrid toolbox. We have a problem of supply, and we are in time, on the 31st of March, there is the deadline for presentation of internal security fund related proposal, and there is a specific pillar on stress test. The more we discuss this type of proposal, the more we find out that there is a lot of blind spot also in the energy sector, in which stress tests really need to be performed. Case of Italy, just to mention, like something that I know from a very close perspective, we completely changed, our supply chain during the Ukrainian, invasion to get rid of the Russian gas. We're now importing from elsewhere. Now we have this FSRU, the terminal for LNG, and we don't know how to perform stress tests on that. We know we need to do, but we need to put together a methodology for the stress test. So we need to be aware of what can go wrong on this new infrastructure that we have, included in our, domain of national vital infrastructure in the energy sector, and we need to, perform stress tests on them. So basically, coming to the conclusion of my paper, there is for sure 3 recommendations that I would like to recall. First of all, since we have a mature framework, as also, the representative of the Commission, also stated, we need to allow time for all the stakeholders to reach a minimum level of maturity. Not only harmonization is maturity, acquaintance with the file. Not all the infrastructure, not all the member states are up to speed and at the same level. So we truly need to give this some time, because also the entry into force of the Critical Entity Resilience Directive, along with the NIS2 that was already pretty known, it's adding further complexity. They need to deal with physical security, they need to deal with hybrid threat, they need to deal with climate change. Also in climate change, operators need to be really guided, because they don't know how to deal with this specific topic. And then, since we are talking about maturity, one of the things that really worked in the late 2000 was the European Program for Critical Infrastructure Protection. It was created along the first directive on critical infrastructure. In this program, the conditions were created for people to really, create a forum, European Forum on Critical Infrastructure Protection. Since the closure of the program in 2020, this forum is a little bit dissolved. There is many instances, and CERRE is one of them, for sure. But that one, because it was driven by the EU institution, was creating the condition for Alessandro to be Alessandro, not professor, or, so that I can talk to Annika, I can talk to Catherine, and we are Catherine, Annika, and Alessandro talking. So tearing down the wall and the silos among people to discuss, critical infrastructure protection and resilience in a way that is informal, in what I called in a safe environment. It was creating a safe environment where there is no mistake, there is no judgment. This shall be rebooted. It's one of the recommendations in my paper. Since we have now the NIS2 and the Critical Entity Resilience Directive, what is truly missing is some action in which you can funnel all of the knowledge that we are creating to Horizon, ISF, instances like CERRE, and bring it in the hands, directly in the hands of the operator so that they can use it. And last but not least, since we are mainly talking about governance and the human dimension, we also need to include also the technological dimension. We already recognize that we have problem with supply chain, that we don't have stable supply chain. We need to have ownership on supply chain, but we need also to add the trustworthiness of the supply chain. I think we did some major step with the Cybersecurity Act, where we created this European cybersecurity certification framework, where specific scheme can be created in specific domain. Maybe energy is the next one that deserves a dedicated scheme, because I think we all recognize the importance of having trustworthy components installed in our critical infrastructure so that we can start, since we displayed among the recommendations the resilience by design, we can set a threshold for cyber resilience into components that are installed in our energy infrastructure, and they can be trusted because they are certified in the EU. This will also create, the condition for, European labeled product to be really interesting, not only for the European member states, but also for allied countries that could, see in the European labeling a sign of trust, so they can implement, something that is really good also for them. That were my conclusion. I hope I was on time, and thank you very much indeed once again for allowing me to participate. Back to you, Annika. Thanks.
Thank you, Alessandro. It was really a privilege to work with you, first time for us, because not only you are a researcher in this area and have a wealth of experience, but you also advised the Italian government on the implementation of the different directives that you've mentioned. So I took away from your paper, there is a great and very mature framework, but it remains fragmented. It remains very unevenly implemented, and operators face very different requirements, overlapping requirements from time to time. So very hands-on recommendations. I'd love to call on a number of people here around who have also contributed to the discussions. I'm looking also at the operator sitting next to you, since you were mentioning the operators, but I also heard that Bruno wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Annika. I think what we've listened to and what we heard from Paul and Catherine, as well as from Alessandro, is the critical role of energy governance. And clearly, there's a huge challenge there. And we see it in every dimension of the energy policy, and in every dimension of the resilience complex. I think it makes a new study that we are launching. We are going to launch I hope in a few days on energy governance more timely. We have been asked by Enrico Lettas, who's the chairman of Institut Jacques Delors, to contribute to a paper that is being prepared for the summer on precisely these aspects: one market, one Europe, one energy market. And that is going to be the new Lettas paper on energy. We are launching this now, and we hope that, of course, we're going to get the support of a number of our members to that project, because it's clear that it's going to be not only a fundamentally important project, but it's also going to be one which is going to give everybody who's participating in it high visibility, as you can imagine. So that's what I wanted to say at this stage.
Thank you, Bruno. And indeed, this provides a very interesting use case for the governance question. Now, let's be super disciplined, because we have so many speakers in the room and a wealth of experience. I'd love to come back to cybersecurity and to the operator perspective, because Oliver Franz, you're sitting next to Alessandro from E.ON, and I think you have a thing or two to say about how you're mitigating risk as an operator at DSO level also. And please be all mindful that we have to race through these papers. We still have two to come.
Yes, of course. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having us today. First of all, I could say I very much agree with what Alessandro has been saying, and then I could stop. But that would, of course, be terribly boring, though fast. So maybe let me try and give a agreeing, but also sometimes disagreeing, or let's say qualifying perspective. So first of all, we very much agree that there is this triplet, or in our case, even a quadruplet, because there's also the network code on cybersecurity on top of everything, adding to everything. We very much agree that there is probably a necessity to apply this now, to also reach a certain maturity before we now start to do something all over again. Of course, if we find a leak, a concrete problem, we probably need to work on that in high speed. Having said that, I believe there is still also room for improvement. So while I said the one thing, we do as a company also support the omnibus action that is going on. Because just to give you one concrete example of debureaucratization that happens there, we used to have many authorities to which we needed to report an incident. We will only have one in the future, which helps. It's just one little tiny step where you can take red tape, if you want to call it that, not exactly right, I know, out. And then I was wondering a bit, because you talked about lock-in effects at a certain level, and I wondered because, so first of all, my understanding, but it might be just my perception, is that most of the OT equipment, especially that is deployed in Europe, is actually European at this date. The majority. And we should probably be happy about that, because we have other parts of the system where obviously the majority of the stuff is not European. There also has been an ownership change on one important supplier lately. I recognize that. But still, what I was wondering about really, and I would be interested in Catherine's perspective, is it seems to me that we're moving into a world where longer-term negotiations and contractual relations become much more of an issue again, also in the CFD and so on, which was not the norm before. But of course, we have maybe then the lock-in story. And so how to balance that? That is a bit what I'm wondering about right now. And then maybe to add on OT, maybe if I may come back to that, in the end, everything costs money. And you have to imagine that we run a private telephone network on the 110 kV high voltage grid in Germany. And of course, we have been asked the question numerous times by the regulator, do you really need your own telephone? Why don't you just use the mobile phone that's around there anyways? And you might be aware that we're also installing a 450 megahertz private radio system in Germany, which will also be limited in usage to us as the grid operators and some of the security services. Again, the question being asked, do you really need your own private radio network? Why don't you just use the mobile phones that everybody else uses? And again, and I'll close by quoting Alan Greenspan. He was talking about monetary policy, of course, but he said once famously, insurance is cheap. And I believe this is also the case here. It is probably cheaper to insure yourself than to cope with the damage later. Because the damage is probably really like a fat tail in the distribution, if it so happens. So we should probably need to focus, and there comes in the governance regulation very heavily, I believe, on making sure that regulators understand that a small part but significant part of their job will also be to make insurance decisions. Thank you.
It's the ex-ante aspect, which I think will come out of a few papers here. Catherine, do you want to respond?
Very shortly on this long-term perspective is less and less sure. That's very true, so I will just agree with you. And when we worked on, for example, solidarity mechanism, that's, I think, a very good example that real solidarity, in particular when it comes to energy, that's with a smaller group of trusted partners. That's real solidarity, not solidarity just in times of crisis, but in everyday operation. It's within a closed group of partners, and you need to regulate this relationship to know how to react and how to balance the cost as well, and benefits.
Now that's a great bridge back to the regulators here in the room. I think we have Lee Greer with us from the Northern Irish regulator, and we also have Peter Bingham from Ofgem, I think, joining us online. Both have contributed also to the discussions. I'd love to hear what you think about what was just said.
Sure, and thanks very much for the invite today. I enjoyed reading all of the papers, and I must say that my synopsis was all of the papers bring a very different perspective, but present some common themes. So I think you were more articulate in the slides that you presented, but did pick up on the common themes. I think the environment that we're all working in, it's with very complex systems already, and this addition of threats brings an added level of complexity. And again, I think over the past few years, we are dealing with abrupt changes that are coming in. So these abrupt events are coming in and affecting supply, not demand. Demand is still there, but these abrupt events are affecting supply and bringing price spikes at speed. But unfortunately, the prices don't reduce at the same pace. So that's something that we need to look at, I think, more so in terms of the market design to make sure that there's a better correlation between those. I think as a society, we are obviously so reliant on electricity, but again, as a government, as a regulator, as a system operator, we're always asking, do we do a good enough job at preparing for events such as have happened over the last few years? And I think we've been so fortunate in general that we have reliable electricity systems, but we need to shift away from focusing on reliability to resilience, as has been described in the papers. And again, I think that's not about how well we keep the lights on, but how quickly we get them back on after an event. So we have worked so much on planning and maybe less so on preparedness. So I think we do have a framework in place. I agree with others in the room that it's about evolution, not revolution. So adding additional layers to that framework and perhaps improving the toolbox, whether that's through legislative change, regulatory framework, or the toolbox that the TSOs have available. And again, we just need to be more strategic about how we deal with this in terms of future-proofing. So it's not about the norm of us all operating in near time and real time. It's about thinking how we can make the system more resilient in future. Again, while bearing in mind there's a cost that comes with everything, and we want to make sure that everything's affordable. So I do appreciate the point about discussions with the regulator and ensuring that your operations are financeable, and certainly in Ireland and Northern Ireland. We do have a process through emergency preparedness that we do practice with, and that involves using the walkie-talkies that are used in an emergency response with civil contingencies in the event that the mobile phone networks are down. We do prepare for that too. So yeah, I think we can build on the frameworks that we already have. So evolution of those.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. You mentioned being more strategic, and I think the UK has already quite a comprehensive approach, and talking Great Britain now, to resilience, having a resilience by design approach. Now let's test our technical infrastructure and see if Peter Bingham can come into the discussion.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. We see you. Wonderful. And hear you.
Hello there. Hi. Thank you for inviting me today. Yes, I'm representing Ofgem, so we're the energy regulator for Great Britain, as opposed to Northern Ireland. Just on the topic of cybersecurity, so we've got a well-established set of cybersecurity standards that were established on the back of the NIS regulations. We have, quite an extensive program of monitoring and inspections of the operators of essential infrastructure. Where we find non-conformities, we take action. We've taken enforcement action and imposed penalties where we found non-compliance. And that's driven a culture whereby the companies are seeking to continually harden their infrastructure against cyber attack. The other dimension of this is because, with the regulator where we fund the network companies, we've been giving the network companies significant funds to again harden their cyber resilience. So we feel we're in a pretty strong position, but we can't be complacent. We've got to build on this. There's a new cyber bill established in Great Britain that we will be taking forward. And also the point about supply chain resonates really quite strongly. We found operators who've installed equipment that is actually not cyber secure at all. And this is control equipment for essential infrastructure. And we've had to take action in that case. And sometimes that's not equipment that's been sourced from the Far East. That's equipment that's been sourced more locally. So it is, an important stream in all of this work is again, is security by design, ensuring that equipment that is supplied for our energy system is cyber resilient.
Thank you, Peter. I have Christina Banken here next to me from the European Commission, and you are team leader working with Monica Sigri and working very hard, I think, already on the security of supply revision. Do these points resonate with you?
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Yes, they resonate. I took a lot of notes, but I will try to be brief. I fully agree with what Alessandro said. I agree with the urgency, first of all, and I also agree with the challenges. I mean, in the future, our energy system will be much more electrified. It will be smarter, therefore, and more digitalized, and that comes with a lot of opportunities, and it's a great transition. But of course, it also comes with increased challenges and risks. And when we look at the risks, I mean, the main risks are supply chain on the one hand, so also secure supply of critical raw materials that we need for the clean energy technologies, but also, of course, security risks such as physical, cyber, or hybrid threats. And this is also a bit the narrative behind why we're doing this revision now, in a first step focusing on gas and electricity, because those two regulations came out in 2017 and 2019 respectively, so not that old in the grand scheme of things, but of course since then a lot of things have happened that warrant this revision. Now, in the revision, Monica has already touched upon this a little bit in her earlier remarks, but in this revision there will also be a bigger focus on cybersecurity, and of course in coherence, and let me stress this very clearly, in coherence with existing horizontal legislation. So, as was said earlier, we do not intend to change or amend any existing horizontal legislation, but it's really where we see, coming strictly from an energy security point of view, where we see, okay, there's a gap that we would like to fill, so very technical level additions. For cybersecurity specifically, Monica already mentioned an increased focus on our risk assessments, also now on cybersecurity. Also know your grid better for operators, so to make sure that every operator of critical energy infrastructure is really aware of where the bottlenecks are and where the weaknesses are. And then also, I've seen this on the slides and also mentioned now a lot by other speakers, is resilience by design. This is also something we're looking into for our revision. Resilience by design, meaning for us that new energy infrastructure, new critical energy infrastructure projects would need to look in the planning stage already at resilience criteria. Now, resilience criteria would cover cybersecurity, physical security, and also climate change mitigation measures. So again, this broader view on overall security. There were a couple more things I wanted to react to what was on the slides and what previous speakers said. One more point when it comes to cybersecurity, we are also currently working in my team on risk assessments on wind and solar. So cybersecurity risk assessments together with DG Connect. The one for wind should be published soon, I hope, and the one for solar, we're currently in the middle of conducting interviews with industry and it should be out this summer. So this is also really something we're looking into, depending on the energy, the clean energy supply chains, as we see this increasing risks there, of course. And then maybe also on that, of course, when it comes to cybersecurity in energy installations, one part is, of course, the equipment and where the equipment is coming from. But a big part is also the operation of the equipment and the maintenance and the management, who is doing, regardless of where the equipment comes from, who's doing the maintenance, who's doing software updates, how are they done, who is taking care of the data management, who has access, how is it when it comes to remote access control. So these are also all things we need to look at when it comes to mitigation measures for cybersecurity, regardless of where the component might be coming from. And then one last thing I wanted to react to. It was on the slides, and it was also mentioned that, of course, cybersecurity risks can be very difficult to be detected by the operators. And I think this is a nice link then also to cooperation between the civil and the defense sector. And that is also something that, especially from the perspective of energy security, we look at very closely. We, for example, work a lot together with NATO as well, especially in the field of the protection of critical energy infrastructure. And we really see a need for better cooperation, coordination, and communication between the energy and the defense sector. So this is also something that will be reflected in our revision. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I have to be ruthless because we have to go to the next topic. But I have Paul.
Well, perhaps you take the next topic. If there's still time left at the end, I will have a question for Alessandro, but otherwise, we better take the other papers. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's a
bit of time.
fantastic idea, because I do think we still have some interesting things to discuss here. But all, thank you so much on the cyber discussion. I'd like to lead over, and Christine, you mentioned actually the non-price criteria that are actually playing a role now, and that leads me to the next paper that we put out and the research on supply chains. Do we have Giancarlo online?
Yes, I am.
Thumbs up. Giancarlo,
yes.
Very quickly, some of the key findings from your research, and so that we can have the discussion.
So first of all, thank you for asking me to join this group of excellent researchers. I'm not an expert of energy markets, so I had to learn a lot, and I contribute very little. So my contribution is mostly on public procurement issues. So we want to try to improve the resilience of the electricity market, or the energy markets. This is costly. We have regulations scattered in various acts which are trying to go in that direction, but my perception as an outsider studying for the first time on this regulation is that these are fragmented and they are not sufficiently coordinated, and it's not a sufficient push to make the jump toward a really more resilient system. This is a more general point than for energy markets, but to me it seems my perception was that we don't have the regulatory measures that we need to make this jump and really get more resilient, because the costs are large. It's not clear who's going to be covering these costs and who will be coordinating. So then my specialty is public procurement. I've been running the research center of the Italian Public Procurement Agency for 4 years before going back to academia. So I try to look at my procurement know-how and see how public procurement could be used to give a push to resilience. Now, we know that since the Draghi report, public procurement is one of the few tools that we have, for all kinds of innovation, for AI, for resilience, for digital. We are all looking at public procurement as the solution for the absence of venture capital, so we cannot do everything with public procurement. That said, public procurement is 15% of GDP. So if you twist a little bit public procurement, you can run a long way, okay? So the rest of the report, the report focused on how we could use public procurement to try to improve our resilience positions. And so it looks at diversification and how we can be rewarded in public procurement directive. It looks at bi-European requirements and national security exclusion grounds, and takes a very, very careful stance on that, because the evidence we have that they're not being very effective in the US, at least in the history of the Buy American Act, and they are very troublesome in terms of trade policy. So there will be like national security exclusion grounds. There would be an extreme measures for extreme niche industries where there is really a potential for European industry to scale up. Then I look at public procurement of innovation, which I believe is a crucial dimension that could be leveraged for improving in the longer run our supply chain resilience. And I'm not being specific to the electricity markets. First of all, because they're very complex markets, and I don't have a full understanding of these markets. I've been working a lot on financial markets. They are network industries that resemble in some parts the energy markets, but the kind of hints from my papers are more looking at how can we leverage public procurement to push and give incentives to public, semi-public utilities and buyers to transfer this incentive to private suppliers to the supply chain and achieve a supply chain level higher resilience. Crucial dimension is also centralization of procurement and measurement. Okay, who should measure? How do we measure resilience? The previous speaker already talked about certification. Certification is, in my view, crucial issue. So just to go directly to the main point, the main point in the conclusion of the paper are suggestions on how to amend the current public procurement directive to allow for more easy accommodation of the needs for resilience. In particular, this is what we're looking. The dimension I was looking at is the dimension on multi-sourcing and multi-lots division in private procurement that can be changed in terms of wording and in terms of objectives in the directives, because at the moment they're not very explicit. This is a crucial thing that can help diversification, which is a crucial dimension of resilience. The possibility to use national security exclusion or bi-European requirements is discussed, but it's, as I said, something which should be reserved for very, very extreme cases. There is an important need of centralization of public procurement, both in terms of coordination and standardization of stuff that we buy, but also in terms of stimulating innovation. So innovation is a crucial part for the long-term strategy that could help develop inside internal markets, products and services that could replace other services that are more subject to geopolitical dependence and so on. And for that, you need centralization. So we should push public procurement to go towards centralization much more than what we have. We have some basis of that. We need to go much, much more into that direction. The competence of public buyers is crucial. We don't have, in my view, sufficient skills at the contracting authorities to implement effectively a long-term strategic management of this type. We can improve on that for sure. If you compare to our American counterparts, they have a university within the U.S. Air Force. We are far away from that level, and we should go in that direction. A crucial issue is how do you reward efforts towards resilience? Well, to reward anything, you need to measure it. Okay, so the first thing is how do we measure resilience? And so we discussed in the paper how you could structure a set of indicators, creating a resilience score. And then the question is who should measure that? And we cannot expect decentralized operators, network operators, or regulators to have the burden of measuring resilience of certain supply chains. So if we really want to have a measure of resilience that could be introduced in scoring of large procurement auctions, which is what you need. If you really want to reward a supply chain or a supplier for its effort in terms of resilience, you want to give them points in the scoring rule, or you want to have a higher benchmark at procurement in the procurement auctions. So if you want to do that, you need a measure of from a certifier of the whether like a rating in trade rating markets of the supplier and its supply chain that goes all the way to the roots, but it must be produced by a single third party to avoid duplication efforts and too much paperwork and burden on the contracting authority. So we hear what I would think, if we go seriously for that, is that we will need a new small agency that is in charge, maybe part of, maybe a joint venture between regulators, but is part of measurement and certification of resilience ratings. And this resilience rating can then be used. Okay, that's finished.
Giancarlo, thank you so much. I think you're putting the finger of a key question that also came out in our discussions a lot with regulators who have that difficult task to actually implement that measurement and are also thinking about it. I know we also have technology providers. We have people who are actually affected by supply chains here in the room. So I'm looking around to see if there are any reactions. Perhaps GE Vernova? Yeah, Daniel, do you want to come in? Great.
I can kick the ball first. First, thank you for organizing this event. I think it's very timely because we are on a turning point right between the publication or adoption of the GRIS package and the upcoming security of supply framework, which go very well together. And it's really important to look at the energy system in a holistic view, and I really appreciate that this has been appreciated in the studies that we have seen also in the approach by the European Commission. To increase the security and resilience, I would put it twofold. First, let's look at the supply. I think nobody denies that the future energy system and the future electricity system will be primarily based on renewables, but the higher uptake of renewables shouldn't be the goal per se. The goal should be decarbonized, but at the same time reliable energy system. So we also need to count with other low carbon and decarbonized sources that actually can lead us to higher electrification without compromising the decarbonization goals. And the second point is infrastructure. This has been already addressed, so I won't repeat what has been already said, but we really appreciate the higher stress on non-price criteria, including sustainability and cybersecurity. This is something that we would like to see reflected in the upcoming security of supply framework, so I was very happy to hear that it's foreseen. But we also shouldn't forget about the physical security. And if we look, for example, on what's happening in Ukraine, we can see that the energy infrastructure is on the front line, both for physical threats and hybrid threats. And we need to be prepared for such a situation, be it a military attack, but also be it, for example, natural disasters. And what we are trying to promote is a concept that has been introduced during the Biden administration in the US, so-called strategic reserve, which is basically incentivization of a TSO to stockpile some of the critical grid components. And we need to seek synergies between what the EU is doing and what NATO is planning. NATO countries and allied countries are planning higher defense and resilience spendings, and this is a great example where grid infrastructure could be perceived as a critical infrastructure infrastructure and basically considered under the 1.5% on resilience spending under NATO. So in a nutshell, be agnostic when it comes to low carbon and renewable sources, and holistic approach when it comes to grid resilience.
Okay, you've opened a number of buckets here, but maybe let me come back to one, because I know we have TSOs in the room, we have grid technology providers, also your competition sitting here on the other side of the table. When we talk about stockpiling, critical stockpiling, and NSOE, I think, Giancarlo mentioned certification, but I think there's also a question around harmonization and standards. What can come from the industry? Is that something you want to come into, please, or present
Big
yourself?
questions. So Emil Tan from NSOE. There's a lot of background to it. We started with Grid Action Plan. Grid Action Plan in action point number 13 actually asked both TSOs and DSOs to work with the relevant stakeholders, manufacturing associations, to work on in which angles we can do harmonization. And actually, so far we've delivered on that. What we did was looking at pre-qualification and testing for cables. We focused on high voltage cables at this point. And next to that, we also looked into HVDC projects' high-level specifications. So basically, producing one template for every TSO to use for their HVDC projects. So these are quick wins, I would say, but in the longer term, as our colleague just was mentioning about the public procurement, it's super important for us. We've already published a position on this this January, just before the closure of the public procurement directives public consultation. And there we listed 14 policy proposals. This is available online, you can have a look. But mainly just to react to what my colleague from Vernova was saying, something that could be highlighted is perhaps enabling TSOs to sell and swap equipment and servicing among themselves to alleviate these supply chain problems. This is something that is not permitted under the current public procurement rules, but it would, in our opinion, greatly impact, positively impact. And in practical terms, what it would mean is if one equipment could be used by another TSO in times of emergency, etc., this should be enabled by the legal framework to be done as soon as possible. And in many cases, TSOs wants to do that, but they're not allowed to. They have to reopen the tenders, they have to revisit a lot of legislation, and this is simply not possible. There are other elements to look into for sure. We also have a great call for simplification and more flexibility in the tender procedures. There are some elements already allowed in the Security and Defense Directive that doesn't apply to the grid technologies. We would welcome if that could be also the case. But in any case, I think I can just echo what has been said here. It's super important, and it will be the key enabler to target many problems.
Maybe I can just add my two cents on the two topics. So on stockpiling, sounds like a sensible idea when we think about what Light mentioned on getting power back on. But obviously, many of the grid equipment are currently long lead items. So there is long waiting lists to get the equipment to have it installed now. I don't see how additional equipment production can then be stockpiled on top. So that's an additional demand, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at then more closely. Where do we get this from? The second point is on the harmonization, and indeed you mentioned it. I mean, the reality that we face today is that the tenders are very, very complex. So for the larger solutions, we face 23,000 pages of text. These are all highly individualized requirements by the TSOs and operators. And obviously, if you are in such highly individualized system, it's very difficult to think about what you can replace in a case of emergency. So I think getting to a system where already among the 40 TSOs in Europe, you can come to something where the procurement requirements are more aligned, so that there's more freedom to design to the OEMs on, how a transformer should look like to make it functional. That could then actually be also very helpful in terms of replacing equipment if there is an emergency or security situation. And sorry, I also have to leave now.
But thanks for contributing, Benedict. And this leads me to Peter Bingham, who's online from Ofgem, because I think Great Britain has an advanced procurement mechanism. Can you fill us in what you're doing there?
We do indeed, because of the sheer volume of investment to decarbonise our energy system. There is constraints in the supply chain, and that's driving up costs that ultimately get borne by consumers. So, we set about a process where we're developing a kind of strategic planning approach to developing our power system out to 2050. And that will deliver sort of long-term network investment plans, and therefore we've developed what we call the advanced procurement mechanism, and this is to enable the TSOs to go out to the market and effectively bulk buy from the supply chain. So, they might say, well, over the next 20 years, we need 1,000 kilometers of cable. So, they can place an order so that will then encourage the supply chain to build the manufacturing capabilities to be able to deliver that. And hopefully that will create availability of the essential components we need at a reasonable cost. And there are other dimensions to this as well. We need to ensure that any components they're bought, they're safe, they're secure, they're reliable, and responsibly sourced as well. We're always very conscious about child labour and such forth being used to manufacture this sort of stuff. So, sort of trying to bake those sorts of requirements into this process. But yes, essentially, we're encouraging the TSOs to bulk buy, to stimulate the supply chain, to give the supply chain visibility, to build the capacity that ultimately we'll all need.
Thank you, Peter. And once again, I hate to cut this short, so I just want to refer back to Giancarlo's paper, which is a very clear and topical paper on the upcoming procurement reform on Buy European and how useful this concept. So have a look. I think our colleagues have provided QR codes to have direct access to the studies. Let's move into the last discussion, which is last but not least, because it's around price shocks, and the paper couldn't be more timely. Kong is explaining in there, I think, a little bit of the workings of the global market and how it is affecting us here in Europe. He's actually using Qatar supply shocks as an example. So please tell us a little bit about it.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, but also participation online as well, and giving me this chance to work on this problem and question. So, as Monica from European Commission mentioned, that the physical energy security and the price is a manifestation of the security of supply in the energy system from this. So they're the same side of the same coin. And in the paper, what I wanted to look into is to zoom into the price, the impacts of stress events, the extreme set of events that could impact disproportionately the wholesale gas and electricity prices in Europe, between now and 2030 or 2035, because to me, I think that is the one of the defining period in the European energy markets, and in particular energy transition. We're not yet very much advanced on the electrification to completely decarbonize and reduce our reliance on fossil fuel supplies to back up when intermittent generation is not there when we need them. But also, on the other hand, the geopolitical developments, and in particular reflection after the Ukraine's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the ensuing energy crisis in 2021 to 2023. And so I wanted just to look into those post 2021-23 European energy markets and system, and to ask the question to what extent we are price resilient instead of physical adequacy. So I was not interested in very much into looking into the infrastructure security as such, because to me, provided that price rises in the liberalized energy markets, the energy molecules and electrons should be there, hopefully, to serve the underlying energy services demand. And in the paper, I defined the energy price resilience as the ability of the energy system and markets to withstand, absorb, and recover from those periods of acute high energy prices, but also, after those periods, to adapt structurally to the future, a set of events that might occur in the similar set of events and coincidences and circumstances. And I'd like to bring just four key insights that I've looked into and discussed more elaborately and numerically as well in the paper. The first one is wholesale energy prices between now and 2030-35 in Europe is behaving very non-linearly to the set of stress events. What I mean by this is prices rises disproportionately as you stack up the stress events. On the other hand, they drop much slower once the shock events propagate through the system. And that is important insight, because therefore the energy price resilience cannot be considered or analyzed from the average prices point of view. We need to look into the tail events and the tail prices outcomes. So what are the key drivers that really inflate those prices in the markets where you have both gas and electricity, which are very tightly coupled? So when wind and solar is not blowing on the European electricity system, we largely is going to be calling on to the fossil fuel, and in particular natural gas, as a backup fuel to provide the generation energy and capacity to serve the demand. The second point and insight is the European energy system post-2023 crisis is largely going to be relying on LNG, the global gas markets. And in many of the scenarios and events that I analyzed, up to 90% of the incremental energy inputs that is going to be needed in those stress events is going to be provided by the LNG markets. That is, very important and insight given the current situation that we are in the Middle East, crisis and war in Iran, for example. The third conclusion and insight is geographical impacts across the European national markets are not uniformly in those stress events. I found that, in particular, the markets in the Eastern and South European markets are disproportionately impacted more relative to the average European markets, precisely because even with all of the planned infrastructure, there's still some bottlenecks that would not allow the energy to be transported to those markets. So there is an element of sort of solidarity as well in those stress events. And lastly, of course, what I found is that as you stack up those sort of shock events, availability of global LNG supplies, periods of low wind and solar, a very cold winter, for example, the prices between gas and power feedback. They are inflated and affect each other. It's not just in those stress events. You have a propagation from the high gas prices to the power prices, but also potentially the other way around as well in those set of extreme events. What I also stressed and discussed in the paper is a set of policy tools that we have been discussing, joint risk assessment in power and gas markets, storage governance and mandates, and so on and so forth. And what I stress in the paper is the portfolio approach, is that to reach the energy price resilience in Europe, you need a set of tools. There's no silver bullet point in this sense. What I also proposed in the paper as a immediate next steps or that policymakers could look into is to adopt what I call energy resilience metric, which is built on the N-1 criteria, the physical, infrastructure adequacy metrics that are under existing regulatory framework, to build on this metric and to analyze what are the set of events, what are the key drivers. So for example, I propose to look at the set of joint stress events that could inflate our energy demand, both on the gas side, but also on the power sector as well. Because I look at the 35 to 40 years of historical weather events, and there are clearly some correlation. When you have a particular cold winter, you normally also have a lower wind output across some of those years. So therefore, a joint stress events is very important to build into these metrics and energy security assessment. And further to that, I think we the this physical infrastructure adequacy N-1 when you have assessment of how your energy system may cope with the loss of the largest piece of infrastructure is a physical metric. It does not tell you anything about the impact of those events on your prices, because the prices is going to dictate how much energy you're going to have in those N-1 events. And N-1 events and metrics are working fine under two circumstances to me. The first one is that there is an implicit assumption that energy flow will go through those infrastructure, i.e. to what extent you are procuring on spot or long-term contracting. And you have an assumption that the infrastructure that you build, we will have energy flowing through that infrastructure. So there is redundancy, but then also the question of between capacity of infrastructure and the energy flow underpinning that capacity, which I think is very important to understand. To understand, to gauge the impact on the price resilience. I'd like to stop here.
I didn't want to stop you immediately, but
I can talk for another hour, but thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to contribute. But back to you, Annika, please.
No, thank you so much, Kong. And these were a lot of technical questions. Kong actually put out a blog today, which is 3 pages, and which really explains it super well. I've taken away this disconnect between the availability of supply and the prices. So a price nervosity, a nervousness that we see, very quick increase, very slow decrease, unfortunately. Also our exposure to global LNG prices, because LNG is the first backup fuel for Europe. And you really have some really concrete policy recommendations for the upcoming security of supply revision, which is really helpful. Perhaps I'm thinking of calling online. We have Vasiliki Dimopoulos from PPC, Southern European Utilities, since you also mentioned those markets. And perhaps you can disentangle a little bit for us the system adequacy question that Kong also brought up, and perhaps also give us some recommendations for the upcoming revision.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for this timely paper. I think the current tension in the Gulf area provides a strong illustration on how external shocks can affect both gas and electricity systems. So, a very relevant discussion. PPC that I represent is the largest power utility in Southeast Europe, operating across generation, distribution, and supply. So from this position, we are actively and often need to manage prices fluctuations. We are trying to manage it through an integrated business model that is designed to allow us to better manage through this price fluctuation and protect our business and our customers. But we observe that the challenges are increasingly high, recurring, so they clearly illustrate the need for broader frameworks. In our region, the dependence between gas and electricity system is very evident. Let me share an example on how climate change is already reshaping system adequacy and prices. So in our regions, we observe that electricity demand peaks are coming more and more often during summer heat waves in order to cover cooling needs. These heat waves become more intense, more regular, and longer duration. Extreme heat simultaneously increases electricity demand and gas consumption for power generation, and it often creates price pressure. So this is a new reality, an evolving reality. On the other hand, the current gas security and supply regulation was mainly designed around winter heating needs and does not always address in the best way periods of summer heat waves. And I'm saying this as to highlight the need for the EU energy security framework to continue evolving, to address the new challenges. More broadly speaking, we see that there could be more space to go beyond sectoral silos that are currently in place. Our recent experience during the energy crisis revealed important coordination gaps. We observed national emergency measures such as price caps or restrictions on energy flows, which were introduced outside the EU risk preparedness framework. And they put into risk the fragmentation of the internal energy market and the weakening of investors' confidence. So we think that strengthening coordination should be and remain a key priority. And this includes developing joint gas electricity risk assessments, price scenarios, and strengthening cooperation between the relevant EU cooperation groups. That's one area of priority. Another area of priority for us is infrastructure and interconnections. Again, our recent experience showed that inefficient utilization of existing interconnection capacity can significantly amplify price spikes during stress periods. We have some tools in place. We have the obligation for the TSOs to make at least 70% of interconnection capacity available for cross-border trading, and we have the EU's 15% interconnection target. Achieving them is essential for market integration, security of supply, and affordability. Just to give you another example, according to ACERRE, a full compliance with the 70% rule during the summer of 2024 would have halved the most severe evening price spikes in Southeast Europe. It would reduce the cost of the peaks by around 78 euros per megawatt hour. This is an impact fairly significant and cannot be ignored. These are some key areas that we have identified as priorities. I would also like to briefly address the debate, the ongoing debate on electricity market design, because it's also often connected to price spikes. So high or even negative electricity prices should not be considered as a market failure. They should be considered as signals of scarcity or surplus, and that are there to ensure efficient dispatch, encourage flexibility, and guide investment. Marginal prices is a supply and demand mechanism, and it remains essential in our view for market efficiency. Trying to introduce alternative systems such as pay-as-bid could result in increasing strategic bidding, reducing transparency, and raising system costs. So for us, the priority should be strengthening the system resilience within the existing market framework, accelerating renewables, expanding system flexibility, strengthening the interconnection, and improving the diversification of gas supplies. And as a closure, I would say that resilience is not about suppressing price signals, it's about ensuring that when shocks occur, the system can absorb them without generating persistent instability. Okay. And that's obviously a big challenge for us.
Vasiliki, thank you very much. I'd like to bring the discussion back to the room, knowing that there are a number of companies and regulators also around the table that are dealing with this. We haven't heard yet from Paul de Bijl, you chief economist of the Dutch regulator. Perhaps you can also say something about how you deal with volatility and how it affects customers.
Yes, thank you very much. So at the ACM, we are concerned with what happens to consumers when they are exposed to price spikes. And we do try to do several things to help them protect against that. So we monitor electricity companies, their financial position to make sure that they are able to deliver when the wholesale prices spike, and to make sure that they have purchased the amount of electricity on the wholesale market that they need to deliver at a certain higher price that they perhaps haven't expected. So to make sure that they also that the hedging is taken as happened in the correct way. And this translates also into their cost level. So we also monitor the price levels to make sure that retail prices reflect underlying cost levels. But then what we have in this whole debate about resilience and geopolitical shocks, etc., and climate change, is that we will still have price shocks on the wholesale market, on the gas market, and so on. So how to protect then consumers against high prices? Because taking care of resilience doesn't automatically mean that we can protect energy users against high prices. And so that's sort of a separate thing. So trying to make sure that the system is resilient. And there's the question of how to guarantee affordability to make sure that consumers are able to consume electricity and heating to a certain extent that helps them to make a decent living. And here's a point of tension between the efficiency of the market and what is a market failure, and what happens to other public interests. Because a flexible and efficient market price may contribute to an efficient allocation of demand and supply, and in that sense the market may be resilient, but does this also mean that consumers are protected in the sense that they are resilient to shocks? And that requires also thinking about reliability, affordability, and independence, and using more renewables, and maybe also relying more on decentralized and local power generation. And the point I want to end with then is that this, coming back also to the discussion we had introduced by Catherine and Paul about resilience at a more fundamental level. So I think it challenges us to think about the fundamental assumptions about energy governance and the energy system. Because we started with, in the past, when we liberalized the market, we wanted to introduce competition to a certain extent and to introduce incentives to increase cost efficiency, to curb prices for consumers. Then we are now dealing with the energy transition to make room for investments in infrastructure and renewables. And now we are dealing with the impact of climate change and geopolitical shocks. So we want to increase investments in resilience and strategic autonomy. And this calls for a different efficiency concept. So not so much efficiency in the sense that it, in the short term, which is good for low prices. And the reason is that in the long run, resilience introduces costs. We want to have redundancy in the system, for example, and that's costly. We want to have strategic reserves, which is costly. And the market probably will not be able to deliver that to a sufficient extent. So a fundamental assumption to challenge or to rethink perhaps is, well, how far should the role of the market extend, and should perhaps the government take more of the lead and rely more on coordination within countries and between countries at the European level. And my open question was already when I was listening to Paul and Catherine, do you have an idea about which fundamental assumptions should be challenged, and do we need a new leading or guiding principle as an overarching principle to think about how to deal with resilience? That's also the question, trying to make sense of such a vague and broad concept of resilience. I'm just trying to make up my mind and how it relates to the challenges we face also as an energy regulator and consumer protection authority in terms of regulating the tariffs of the grid operators and making sure also that the wholesale prices, the fluctuations, how they translate into retail prices.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. You're raising the mother of questions at CERRE. I think, is the regulatory framework still adequate and fit for the current challenges? Catherine and Paul, since you were put into the picture here, do you want to respond?
Yeah, perhaps a little bit of a kind of a bit in the same exploratory sense. You know, what would you say about the concept of resilience? So you are making the distinction between the short term and the long term, and actually also in the Kong's work, he also does that. For example, the EPR, the Energy Price Resilience Index, he could capture that, both the long term and the short term. He has, for example, a very interesting example about multi-day instabilities, to take that, or perhaps multi-week. So I think we need to make that distinction between the short term and the long term. And in the long term perspective, things may look actually a bit different if you talk about resilience, because that's also about what do you get as a longer term as a consumer, for example, in terms of your possibility to have stability, to have perhaps innovation in your energy supply, to have more self-management if you want to do that, to have more jobs, probably also, and autonomy. So, I mean, there's anyway kind of like a trend to start talking about what are some of these higher level concepts. And we run into that, well, I'm speaking a little bit perhaps from the digital domain. If people say, I am worried about using only equipment and software coming from foreign providers because that doesn't give me, for example, resilience and sufficient autonomy, they're also talking about the long-term jobs and knowledge, and they are saying we need to increase our strategic autonomy. So one larger concept is certainly strategic autonomy, I would say. But you might also be a bit more modest and say, can we learn something from other areas where we are talking about short-term cost and long-term cost, so lifetime cost versus incidental cost? Okay, again, a bit perhaps philosophical, you would say, or exploratory, but I think it's very good to have the debate about these concepts.
Very shortly, and thank you for already putting together the next research agenda for I think that in terms of what can we revise, the fundamental assumption, I think the setup of the energy system in itself. And we have seen that small adjustment, for example, the 15-minute trading intervals on day-ahead market, that's a very good example of that reflects a change in the energy system. So this needs to be understood, reflected. So I think that's part of these fundamentals are changing, and something that you also pointed out, centralized versus this distributed energy system. What does it change to our manner to operate and manage the world system in itself? So we'll just mention that. And understand our vulnerabilities better, probably. So that's linked to risk assessment.
I'm thinking about asking the system operators in the room. We have the TSO level with Terna represented. We have E.ON with the distribution level. We have also the gas operators with Philippe Garec from GRDF. So do you want to come in on the regulatory framework and how adapted it is, or perhaps also react to the earlier presentation?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. And for sure, I would like to further expand on come back on some of the useful insight that was presented and brought on the table. For example, regarding the risks. When we talk about the ensuring the resilience of the energy system, for sure from the TSO perspective, such as Terna, which is the Italian transmission system operator, what is most important is to ensure the continuity, reliability and continuity of supply of the energy supply to the end users. And this objective, by doing this objective, TSO is facing new challenges given by the new context, the new geopolitical context, and by climate change, which involve unprecedented and new risks in terms of physical, cyber, and climate-related risks, which cannot be seen anymore in silos, as also suggested in one of the papers presented before. For such reason, I think that it's important to provide a common framework in which all the risks are assessed and identified, grid vulnerabilities are studied, and resilience intervention are planned. Terna is trying to provide this kind of approach with the security plan, which is an investment plan drafted by Terna in which all this kind of intervention are planned and identified in order to increase system security and system resilience, allowing also to evaluate eventually mutual interdependencies between the different risks and different interventions. The security plan is drafted every year in order to ensure that a new intervention that may come and be necessary in response to an evolving context can be promptly designed and introduced into our plan. And Terna has recently increased the investment in support of energy security, reaching the unprecedented value of 2.3 billion euros over a 5-year horizon, in order to increase the security of the energy system. So provide a common framework to risk evaluation is for importance we try to apply in our business. Moreover, regarding the price shocks in energy markets, previously it was mentioned the importance of removing bottlenecks in energy infrastructure or providing system flexibility. Also in this context, I think that TSO could provide a significant contribution. For example, looking at the Italian case, we face the risk of congestions in our power grid. from the southern areas to the northern area of the country due to the asymmetric distribution of generation, renewable, mainly concentrated in the southern areas with more availability of the energy sources, and the demand, which is mainly concentrated in the north. And this risk of congestion can undermine market efficiency. For this reason, and to address these challenges, this constraint, and to further increase market efficiency and renewable integration, CERRE has set an ambitious plan of intervention as grid reinforcement of about 23 billion over a 10-year horizon. This reinforcement will allow to increase internal transmission capacity by 15 gigawatt by 2034 and increase the cross-border transmission capacity by 40% with respect to current values. Moreover, regarding flexibility, also in the paper, one of the important measures and resources that could be available are the energy storage, which in the power sector can play the important role of shifting the energy from the hours in which the generation, renewable generation, exceed the demand to the hours in which the load is higher. In this way, they help the transmission system operator to ensure the real-time balancing between supply and demand, and also can help reducing the renewable curtailment. And for this reason, and for the importance of this system, it has been recently introduced a new regulatory framework known as MAXE, to further support the development of new transmission of new storage capacity. Under the MAXE framework, investors who build new storage capacity can obtain long-term contract with stable and predictable remuneration, which is important and which can obtain by participating to competitive auction organized by TSO. The aim of this mechanism is to provide clear, stable, and bankable investment signal to the operators in order to further promote the deployment of new storage capacity. As a result of the first action held, a total amount of 10 gigawatt-hour of storage capacity, new storage capacity, has been procured in the southern areas. Therefore, I think that both infrastructural actions and regulatory action might be needed in order to increase the security of the energy system, its independence, and in particular its capacity to withstand price shocks. Because through the market integration, renewable integration, to weaken the link between electricity and gas market, and therefore mitigating the propagation or amplification of price shocks from one sector, one market to the other one.
Thank you so much for pointing at the integration of the market as one of the most important measures to actually build resilience into the system. Which I think Monica also mentioned at the beginning, and also for answering one of the questions from our audience online, which was around the role of storage in resilience. So very useful, and also an important measure to prevent price shocks and to increase the flexibility of the system. So thank you for that. I am wondering, because we're always talking TSOs in Brussels, and I know the DSOs tend to say we're not heard enough. So Oliver, do you feel this is the case in resilience, or do you want to pass the word first to your neighbor, Philippe? Okay, let's have a gas operator perspective first.
Thank you very much for these very interesting exchanges. So I will rebound on a few points that have been evoked before. I think one point here we have to take maybe one step back to say what are we going through? It's transition. Transition goes beyond energy. Transition is a full systemic changes. We're going to change society. So we have to keep that in mind to see that resilience do not apply only to the energy system. It applies to society. That thing being said, I'll come back on what you said, Oliver, earlier, that whenever we take a decision at all level, being individuals, being company, we have always to take the three dimensions of the trilemma together. We're not saying we're going to take the cheapest, we're not going to be the more decarbonized, we're not going to be the more resilient. We always try to strike the best balance. And in fact, the complexity of the transformation makes it impossible to separate this item. You can't say, I'm going to work on resilience, and then after we'll work on decarbonization. You have to work the three at a time. That's an important fact because that makes the thing more complex, more the complex transformation. Other thing, we speak about resilience. It's true that the resilience is been there. We've been talking about resilience for a long time. What is changing is what risks are coming up. 6 years ago, the geopolitical risks we had were not the same. The climate event were not felt as important. And now we even see that new risk coming from the transition itself. When we have stronger electrification, we have more PV and so on, we have attached risks that we have to manage as well. So this means that not only is different because the risks are different, but it's moving faster. So that comes back to, I think someone mentioned management, energy system management have to evolve as well. We have to be more agile. That's one thing. And the thing is, as it's a systemic change, it's not only one people that have to be more agile, it's the whole of us, being companies, being decision policymakers, being citizens. And I think one point that I think is important, the energy system we have now was designed around it was fossil-based. So by nature, it was, top-down, and it was working in silos because there was hardly any connection between gas and electricity. That's not the case anymore. And one you did mention in your speech, Congress, I think you mentioned that to reduce the price shock, we need flexibility. I think flexibility is one of the key words we'll need in the coming years, which is, I don't know, I think, Paul, you mentioned that, is when you think that we have to change the way we are thinking efficiency. And flexibility, I don't know how to put them together, but we need efficiency and flexibility, maybe the energy efficiency first principle. And that have to be born in all our actions. And flexibility may be one of the key to solve our trilemma, because it can help at the time optimize, prevent resilience to price shock. It can help people to get the most affordable energy when available. It can be solar or not. It can be gas when there is not enough, as you mentioned, not enough renewable energy, and it can increase a lot of the resilience. We are DSO, so are much connected to individual customers. And I was thinking of that trilemma for myself. I say, if I want to be resilient tomorrow, I would like to have a gas and electric cooker, so it's cheap. I would like to have an hybrid heating system so that I can use the cheapest energy. And if somehow, because I'm living on the windy area of France, if I have no power, if a small battery, I can cook, I can be warm, I can wait until everything comes back to normal. So I think we have to think not a system changes, not separating the approach, and I think thinking more of a combined, integrated system than trying to say we electrify one way, we put gas on somewhere else. I think we have to think everything at a time, but our energy system is not organized for that. I think one point I'm looking closely what's happening in Great Britain with coming up of the NATO thing, which is typically integrated regulation. So that was my food for thought.
Thank you, Philippe. And now Oliver, who's already ready.
Maybe, first of all, I would like to thank Kong as an economist because I learned something. Otherwise, I'm not going to comment on power prices, but to say we should also keep in mind that DSOs throughout Europe are probably one of the biggest buyers of electricity because they need to procure their losses. In difference, by the way, to the UK, where the losses are being procured by the retail companies. So we are having a tremendous interest in cheap and reliable power out of that logic. I would rather come back to the, let's say, supply chain question a bit, if I may, and also couple that with, let's say, praise for the Commission, first of all, because I believe the way the resilience topic has now been picked up and also included in the grid package is mostly applaudable. We have maybe one little caveat. We would actually like to see the 10E explicitly say that resilience is also for DSOs because they need to have it. probably not something that we need to fight about, but we recognize that the specific sentence more or less stresses that it is a TSO topic in the 10E, also then in the smart grid category. With regards to supply chain, I very much agree with the colleague from Siemens who has left already, namely to say if we wanted to build a stockpile now, that is maybe a bad time to do it because we are scarce anyway. Or we have to be very, let's say, mindful about the scarcity when we decide to do that. Secondly, all I can imagine is really to work it in a way that I would probably say first in, first out, because the stuff ages. And probably we have to be mindful. Cables might work much better than steering components for transformers. The core of the transformers might work much better than whatever. What has been very helpful, if you remember the incident in Berlin, was really sorry, I just can't remember the English word. The Germans call that Stromnetzersatzanlage, meaning you have in the end, a generator. We don't need to talk about the CO2 balance of that, but looking at security of supply and bringing back power to parts of Berlin neighborhoods after 3 days of absolute cold and no power, I believe was worthwhile. So if we have an incident like that, having these things available probably just makes our reaction time shorter. That we have to rebuild the system behind that, different story, but I believe there are things that can be done and can be done more easily. Finally, I would really, how should I say, break a bit of a gap here for private engagement. Because if you look at us as a company, we've realized that we have a certain need of a certain amount of assets in the future, and we've also taken care of that. So there has been an announcement last year, also very publicly, together with a bunch of suppliers, like in the 20s of companies, that said we have now made contracts and procurement activities that will ensure that we need, or that we get what we need, also in the quality that we need it, because we also went there and told the colleagues, you have to come down with your alternatives. So no more 250 types of low voltage transformers, just maybe 5. Plus colors, plus a little bit, but really coming down because it makes us more resilient. But, and that's the point I was trying to make, if you look at the corresponding announcements of the OEMs, they say very clearly that the activity that we have taken creates the credibility on their side to actually start investing in Europe in additional capacity. So I'm not sure whether doing it all via public procurement rules and more bureaucracy is the right way, or whether you might argue with Manko Olsen that for us it was important enough to take that initiative ourselves. And maybe we are alone in that, but there is potential in increasing, especially supply chain resilience, again, by going a bit into longer term arrangements, creating a certain lock-in maybe, but you can do that, and we've done, and we believe that there is merit to that, and that it should also be possible to do that in the future, because just by ordering stuff, we won't get there, I guess. Thank you.
So, unless there are now any reactions in the room, yes, Massimo, come in, and then perhaps Christine, since you were directly referring to the Commission, so I want to give the word back to the Commission also.
Thank you. And obviously I have a question for Professor Kong, which I know very well. I mean, the question I have for you is, you depicted a new reality with those 4 points. Can you say more about how do you think that evolving? What do you think we will evolve? Because you say there is a dependency, there is something that we will need. We're talking about electrification. We need to define security of supply, resilience, concept that still, and we have consumers. So what do you see in the next 10, 20 years? I know it's difficult to predict, but what is your take? And I would like to ask Commission if you agree with this assessment, because I believe that it's very hybrid as an assessment. I mean, it's not neat, it's not clear. I mean, it's difficult to manage from a policy perspective, because you might need to look at all our regulation and deconstruct and rebuild differently, as we have been defining policy under targets and modeling 2050, 2040, 2030. And now we look into some realities that requires decisions to make sure consumers will still believe that Europe can grow and operate.
Thank you for this very difficult question. Predicting the future 10, 20 years. I think, you know, I hope that's not me. Stress event, for sure. I think the central question to me is going forward as we rely more on intermittent renewable energy sources on one hand, and at another spectrum is the reliance on the global energy markets and by extension therefore geopolitics and trade relationship and political relationship more generally, how Europe would square that circle in those two extremes to me is the fundamental question, and there are, you know, as I mentioned in the paper as well, there are a number of policy tools and incentives that could help to navigate through those two difficult challenges going forward. So on moderating the wholesale price volatility in that period, there is a role of incentive between you know, reliance on the spot markets relative to long-term contracting, for example, especially on the commodity side, so gas and LNG. And of course, the question of compatibility with environmental objective, because Europe does not want to, on the other hand, to lock in itself into unabated fossil fuels as well. So there is that element of the challenges as well as we progress through the timeline. So I'd say that those are the key dimension as I see it, but there's no silver bullet point to navigate through that three challenges to me.
No easy answers here from research. Christine Banken, you want to come back in?
Yes, thank you. On the DSOs, maybe first, of course, when we look at the grids package and especially at the 10E regulation and also now the proposal for a revised 10E regulation, it's important to note that the measures there are also the ones now strengthened under the proposal, focusing on cyber and physical protection. They focus on cross-border infrastructure. So, of course, there the focus is a little bit different than the focus of our revision, which is really on overall EU energy security. So, of course, the DSOs will also be mentioned in our revision, so I can ensure you there. On the easy question that you posed, of course, I think it comes a bit back to what Monica said earlier already in her opening remarks, that it's not just an energy security issue. I mean, of course, it's a big part of it, I think, but it's really horizontal. And I think this is where we have done, we as the Commission, a lot of work, especially in the past years, to tear down silos and really work horizontally together. I mean, the economic security doctrine that came out in December, I think, is a great example of that, because it really brings together a lot of sectors across the board, including energy, but also just security, physical and also cybersecurity, and most importantly also competitiveness and industrial policy. And I think a lot of changes are happening, and it's really important that, of course, when we come out also now soon with sectoral policy, because of course we focus on energy security, we always have in mind what goes on in the other sectors and how our little part is fitting into the bigger picture, because everything needs to work well together and be coherent, and then I think we can hopefully successfully address these challenges, but it's indeed not easy.
Yeah, we wish you all the best with that task. We've seen, I think, today how how many facets this topic has and how cross-cutting it is, and it's certainly a very complex challenge. I'd like to hand back now to Catherine and Paul to wrap it all up. So that.
Should I start? Right. Thank you. Just stressing some of the points of discussion that you have made. We'll start by the sense of urgency that Alessandro stressed at the beginning, that we need to think fast, smart, as human. And CERRE is well placed to do that because we are an academic regulatory think tank, so this just a bit of add for what we're doing. So, but otherwise, I see on several points need for coordination and harmonization when it is needed. It has been stressed the need to reinforce methodology for risk assessments. The International Energy Agency has been working a lot on climate risk assessment. Here we are talking about geopolitical risk as well as supply chains risk. So here there is a work to do, obviously. Then as well, energy price resilience. I think it's very striking to see that we have not learned very much yet or draw the full conclusions from the previous crisis and the need to have clear coordinated approach, because we see already during the past year many isolated initiatives at the government level, notably on regulatory intervention on wholesale and retail price setting. So that's something that needs to be addressed very shortly. Third point is on tensions. We have many points of tensions and balances to be struck, notably in terms of solidarity versus interdependencies, but as well in terms of centralized distributed energy system and the need to reinforce system integration as well as the distributed level and across sectors. That's something that the principle has been set in the communication from 2020, but we are not yet there, and we see a bit more on planning, but yet there is a lot to do. And on operability and standards, when we see this tension as well between more innovation, but as well the need for more standardization, and that could lead to, when we look at the shaping of network codes, notably on cybersecurity or flexibility, to some technology forced closure, but at the same time we need to leave the door open to innovation and harmonization. So some tensions here. And I will, I'm a legal academic, but I enjoy listening to the latest Nobel Prize in Economics, Philippe Aghion, who has, I think, many interesting thoughts among the other laureates on innovation in technologies of tomorrow and creative distractions. I think here that we have to draw some lessons about what are we investing in, and just look at what is going on in China right now with the negotiation about the next 5-year plan. They are moving very quickly and have a long-term plan for a long time. And finally, echoing what you have said, Philippe, as well, resilience is more than regulation, is a mindset. And it requires acting on technologies, on markets, but there is a lot of behavior work, also in terms of preparedness, stress testing at all levels of the society. Paul?
Complementing this and perhaps partially repeating, so my take on what has been said, and also having read the papers and interacted with all of you, I think that there is a lot of elements that we kind of would put in the scene setting. You know, we are much more geopolitically aware. I think everybody stresses that. There are these different types of risks that have come up, as some people have said. There's the urgency, the turbulence, uncertainty, and this in a sector that actually lives by stability and has a lot of investment and legacy that actually can give that type of stability, which is also a very good thing. I think we are having to take that into account too, but it puts us to the test, as Paul de Bel also said, on rethinking some of the basic concepts about resilience and efficiency, for example, or consumer interest. So that's kind of like the scene setting, and I think we need to continue in that discussion. But to be practical also, I think, and I was really struck by that across the papers and across the sectors, you can actually learn a lot in very practical, concrete things. So Alessandro mentions a whole set of things that you can learn from DORA, which is the resilience regulation in the financial field. And you can start applying that today. It's about contracts, it's about inspections, it's about agreements to see what is happening at the other side with your supplier. Or, for example, as it was mentioned by Giancarlo, about public procurement of innovation, where there's also a lot of experience that you can carry over from other domains. As a matter of fact, also supported by the European Commission and, for example, the research programs. Or this index idea, an energy price resilience index. I think the field of digital should think about a digital service resilience index. And how do you do that? Because there we are also challenged in digital in the terms of the continuity of services or portfolio approach. So there's a lot that we can, in a very practical, you can almost make a matrix. What are now the practical measures that are taken in one domain, and what can we then reuse perhaps in another domain to progress? About the regulatory perspective on that, so I heard actually quite a lot of things being said about current regulation and revisions. To simplify is necessary, and steps are being set for that to some extent, and the various omnibus proposals, including, for example, the single entry point, in better implementation and less gold plating, as also Draghi and Letta are arguing. Don't do that because you get terribly complex, a lot of complexity for industry. On better and new forms of monitoring, like, for example, this index idea, but also, to some extent, unlocking the possibilities where we were so far rather reluctant, for example, in public procurement, and perhaps not being stifled by the idea that this is all national, or that this is all WTO, or that it is only a single type of interest, or it's only about the cheapest. And again, public procurement is almost like a big study topic that's cutting across various sectors and where we need to absolutely progress. And where we can also, by the way, learn, I think, from the Chinese. Up to some more radical revision, for example, more integrated policy, which will be quite difficult, but to some extent, I think people are working on that, including the Commission. There's also this pendulum swinging back and forth between horizontal and vertical measures, you know, and we are not, that's constantly going like that, and perhaps that's the natural process, but we have to assess where are we in this field of energy resilience in that pendulum. And then the point that Bruno mentioned about governance, that governance is so central and we need to rethink that. And actually, I think we don't know how we will organize the governance of the future. So we might find the space to, and create the space perhaps to experiment. I think Alexander does some suggestion in this program idea. Can you experiment there? There are also things that we can learn from other sectors, and it's not self-evident. Even very simple things like a single entry point for reporting your incidents is changing governance, because it's actually handing over authority. It means resources. It means privileged information that people have. It's about power that changes, and it's not self-evident. Well, in some other pieces of legislation, take AI, they do things like sandboxes. So perhaps we have to do some sandboxing here about future governance, and certainly it's, I think, a very fertile and important area for study and perhaps scenario exercising. And I'm very pleased to hear that the Commission also says that they are looking into this, trying to break through the silos, so that you do get confronted with actually these new forms of governance, and ultimately public policy will also play a very important role in that. So I found this really very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are wrapping up. Thank you so much. 5 minutes after the time, but for the amount of things we had to discuss, I think we did quite well. You are really cordially invited to share thoughts around the glass. We also have two scholars here in the room which we didn't talk about, but Niels Henrik von der Veer and Friedrich Baldursson, who's sitting there at the wall, they wrote about climate resilience. So if you want to hear anything about that, they also put out a really interesting paper. Thank you to everyone involved in this important piece of research. It was important in the sense also of the scope of what we had in front of us, and thank you very much to the academics and to Paul and Catherine. So.